Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, both Chairman Reed and Chairman Inhofe. Again, I second our colleague Angus King's compliments to you both for successfully shepherding another NDAA through the process. I do not have video. That is the technical issue we have. However, I do have a statement, and I'd like to just start by saying that I want to open by acknowledging that I did not vote for an exception to statute for Secretary Mattis to serve as Secretary of Defense, and I have publicly stated that I do not support an exception for General Austin. I believe very strongly that there needs to be civilian oversight of the military. And while it's true that Lloyd Austin is no longer wearing the uniform, he retired from active service just 4 years ago. The waiver that Congress is considering would address the statutory requirement that military retirees wait 7 years from leaving regular service in the armed forces before they serve as SecDef. I believe this waiting period is very important. It has already been discussed today. And I think the length of time matters. In fact, I don't think 7 years is long enough. The original 10-year waiting period wisely intended to prevent the type of conflicts that arise when recently retired military commanders oversee leaders in the ranks that they have personal relationships with. I remain disappointed that the legal requirements enshrined in this principle were reduced in 2007 without any congressional debate. The military is a much smaller community than it may seem to people who haven't served, especially as service members work their way up through the ranks, and that pyramid gets steeper and steeper. 4-star generals have spent decades in this community and likely know the combatant commanders and service chiefs very well. Oftentimes, they've grown up together for the majority of their professional lives, and in some cases, they have shared enormous hardship and harrowing experiences in combat. I trust that most of our general officers are professionals and know that they have spent their careers making hard choices. But a Secretary of Defense having personal relationships with the majority of the highest ranking uniform leaders still puts them in a difficult situation. It also means that the top supposedly civilian leader and the top military leaders have very similar professional backgrounds and have spent their entire adult lives in the same military culture. And I don't think that's healthy, because I appreciate the diversity of experience and perspective brought by a secretary who has a different resume and professional trajectory than the generals that they lead. I have serious reservations about the erosion of civilian leadership over our military, one of the foundational principles of our country, and one that I personally risk my own life to defend. I value the service and experience of our military officers, but I value our leaders who spend their careers in civilian service as well. These different populations are supposed to complement each other, act as checks and balances on each other when necessary. This is healthy for democracy. I don't want a military career to become a prerequisite for an appointment to the cabinet. We saw this impulse at the beginning of the Trump administration when Trump showed a brief but troubling fascination with bragging about his, and I quote, generals. The Senate confirmed those appointments out of fear and a desire to surround Trump with adults in the room. As much as I didn't trust Trump, I thought approving an exception to statute for Jim Mattis was unwise then, and I certainly think granting another exception is unwise now. Now is the time to shore up our democratic principles, not to continue to tear them down. That being said, I think it's important to acknowledge, especially now in light of the violent insurrection at our Capitol last week, that I respect the majority rule of my colleagues. I will not vote for an exception to statute to allow someone with just 7 years of relief from active service to be appointed I will not vote for an exception to statute to allow someone who is still within the 7 years of relief from active service to be appointed as Secretary of Defense. However, if my colleagues choose to do so, I will accept their decision and consider Lloyd Austin's nomination fairly and on its merits. I would like to close by acknowledging retired General Lloyd Austin, President-elect Biden's nominee to be Secretary of Defense, is an excellent nominee. While I cannot vote for the exception to statute that would allow him to serve as our next Secretary of Defense, my objection has everything to do with the issues I've just outlined and nothing to do with the man himself. Lloyd Austin served honorably and faithfully for more than 40 years. He broke barriers the entire way and commanded troops, often in combat, with integrity and compassion. I hold Lloyd Austin in the highest esteem and thank him for all that he's done for our country. If Congress passes legislation waiving the requirement for a 7-year waiting period and confirms Lloyd Austin, I have no doubt that he'll bring his trademark dedication and steady leadership to the role of Secretary of Defense. However, I stand firm in my conviction that the principle of civilian control of the military is bigger than any one person or his personal experiences or resume. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the rest of my time.